Minister no longer above the law.
Turkey's a strong man, just got stronger.
Take the Brexit decision back to the people.
The Embassy of the United States here in Jerusalem.
Barbed wire, used properly, can be a beautiful sight.
We are better than that.
How many of you? One of the clips of the year.
Women should feel safe in public places.
It's been a remarkable turnaround in the Korean Peninsula.
All Canadians stand united with Toronto.
It literally did bring a tear to my eye.
I'll do everything I can to make up for my mistake.
Survivors are calling this a landmark verdict.
She was one of the most important journalists of her generation.
One of the last big moral voices of our world.
We need to live together with tolerance and respect.
The girl was special.
She was the queen.
It's nice to be a part of it, I'll tell you that. We'll miss him.
Ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
This is the watershed moment. We will vote them out. Today, at least 20 people killed and 165 injured in Indonesia after a tsunami hits beaches around the Sunda Strait. Also ahead, the US government shutdown set to last until at least Thursday, with Congress failing to reach a budget deal.
We arrived at this moment because President Trump has been on a destructive two-week temper tantrum.
A man under police guard in hospital following a fatal stabbing in Sydney's east. And Melbourne Victory and Melbourne City share the points in the A-League derby. Hello, Lara Holmes with ABC News. We'll just begin with some breaking news now coming out of Indonesia. At least 20 people have been killed after a tsunami hit the Sunda Strait. The country's disaster management agency says 165 people have been injured and dozens of buildings have been damaged. It says the possible cause of the tsunami was a series of underwater landslides which were triggered by a volcano eruption. The area sits between the islands of Java and Sumatra and connects the Java Sea to the Indian Ocean. We'll bring you more on this developing story as soon as it comes to hand. Meanwhile, the partial shutdown of the United States government is now set to stretch to at least Thursday, with Congress failing to reach a budget deal. Republicans and Democrats are blaming each other for the shutdown, with funding for a border wall between the US and Mexico at the centre of the debate.
My colleagues and I are proud to stand with the American people on this subject for the safety of American families and the health and security of our communities. But this time, Democrats have rejected that reasonable request. They've refused to meet President Trump halfway and provide even one-fifth of the resources for the border they were willing to provide just a few months ago.
Mr. President, at midnight last night, roughly 25% of the government shut down because of one person and one person alone, President Trump. We arrived at this moment because President Trump has been on a destructive two-week temper tantrum.
And North America correspondent James Glenday has more from Washington.
the Democrats see themselves as not getting much of the blame in this scenario. Donald Trump has been trying to blame them desperately for a couple of days, but of course just last week he quite forcefully and repeatedly said that he was going to take the blame for the shutdown, and he'd be proud to shut down the parts of the government, at least for border security. That has happened. There are a few little parks around Washington DC and around the nation that have been closed. It is the Saturday before Christmas, so if there was going to be a shutdown, this would be, I guess, the best time to do it, because a lot of the people who are affected were actually already on leave anyway, and it is a weekend. But nonetheless, it is quite significant that the Senate has been meeting. Politicians are still in the Capitol, but we're just hearing that there's unlikely to be a solution to this until after Christmas, perhaps next Thursday at the earliest. It's kind of hard to know what the ultimate outcome of this will be politically. This is the third shutdown, as you mentioned, and really in some senses, everyone's to blame for this. This has been coming for a very, very long time. There have been a lot of talks to try to resolve it. Just a couple of days ago, it appeared that in the Senate, and I think Republican senators and Democratic senators thought they had a deal to pass some $1.3 billion worth of funding for border security, not the $5 billion the president wanted for his wall. It seemed as though the president was going along with that as well, and then suddenly on Thursday morning he changed his mind and said, no, I want the wall. He was under a lot of pressure from some of his most loyal supporters and some very, very outspoken conservative commentators as well, and they appear to have changed his mind, and now he's quite happy for the shutdown to go ahead. Not that long ago he actually again warned that this shutdown could last a long time, and you'd have to say there is a real chance of it going through not just Christmas now, but perhaps even into the new year, when the Democrats are going to take control of the House and the new Congress is going to be sworn in.
And we can bring you more on our top story now. We're joined by our Indonesia correspondent, David Lipson. David, what do we know so far about this tsunami?
Well, we know that it hit overnight in the region of Palembang, which is in the west of the island of Java. That's the most populous island of Indonesia, where the capital sits as well. It initially hit, and at the time, the disaster agencies of Indonesia were assuring people that it was not a tsunami, in fact, urging them not to panic, not to spread fake news on the internet, claiming it was just a tidal wave caused by the full moon. But as the night continued, in fact, fairly recently, just in the last hour or so, they, in fact, put out a clarifying tweet saying, indeed, they do now believe that this was a tsunami caused by, at least in part, a landslide into the water as a result of an eruption, a volcanic eruption on the mountain of Krakatoa, which is a constantly active volcano here, of course, in Indonesia, and has been the subject of some major eruptions in the past. So at this stage, 20 dead, that's confirmed. Another 165 people injured, and several others missing, as well as damage to buildings, and as you can see, damage to property like cars and the like in this area. But beyond that, beyond the videos that are starting to trickle through from mobile phone footage, people taking amateur footage on their phones and the like, there's not a whole lot more information.
So given that this struck overnight, is it likely that the scale of the tsunami will be fully realised or begin to be more realised as the day goes on?
Yeah, absolutely. We are expecting the number of dead and wounded to rise, and that is something that's come from the official channels as well. They have suggested that they believe that the death toll will rise, or at least the numbers that they've put out so far. That's 20 dead, 165 injured. So often is the case with these sorts of disasters that the full extent isn't known for some time. We haven't had any reports that infrastructure like telecommunications has been knocked out, but clearly with any tsunami there is damage to infrastructure, roads and possibly phone lines and electricity as well. As an example of that rising death toll, the quake in central Sulawesi almost 3 months ago now, in Palu in particular, where the death toll was fairly small officially for days, but now it's believed some 2,000 people died and well over 100,000 people were displaced as a result of that tsunami. So we do expect that number to rise.
If the government was talking this down, initially calling it a tidal wave, as you said, what other warnings do residents have when it comes to emergency management over there? Is there many facilities or communication structures that they have access to?
Very little whatsoever. And the earthquake in central Sulawesi a few months ago highlighted that there had been an early warning system for tsunamis, but it hadn't been maintained properly, that some of the buoys had been pilfered, had been stolen, if you like, by fishermen and the like. It's a similar situation, we believe, in the area where this tsunami struck. There wasn't even, as we understand it, an earthquake to warn people that a tsunami could come. That's the biggest warning really that people have these days, is that if there's a quake, people should know at the very least to get away from the coastline as quickly as possible. With this tsunami, it's believed to have been caused by a volcanic eruption and a landslide, which wouldn't have necessarily caused an earthquake. In fact, there's no reports of any earthquake at this time. So potentially this tsunami struck without any warning whatsoever.
It might be difficult to say, but is there any risk of further incidents or strikes, aftershocks from this? Is this area susceptible to this kind of activity?
Yeah, the whole region is susceptible. All of Indonesia is essentially, you could say it's one big volcano, one big volcanic eruption. The Ring of Fire is what it's known as, because there is just so much tectonic plate activity which causes not only earthquakes but volcanoes as well. So it's not believed directly as a response of this particular incident there will be more, but as I say, information is pretty short at the moment, and the whole region is always a hotbed of volcanic and tectonic activity.
David Lipsome reporting from Jakarta there. Many thanks.